Good evening, viewers, and welcome back to Candid Talk. Today's episode is entitled Different Strokes. So, let me set a little bit of context to this. Imagine that you're a sales professional, right? A sales manager in healthcare or in the software industry or in IT, right? We live in a paradigm of super specialism. So, you're a salesperson, you go deep into that, and then there's the sector or the industry. And then, if all goes well and the stars are aligned, then in the course of time, you go up the corporate ladder and you become like a sales VP or a sales director or so forth, right? Now, most of us spend the largest part of our lifetimes just shaping and morphing one particular career. But the person whom we're going to talk to today has done this with aplomb across multiple careers. Begins the journey working in the financial sector, in banking, in treasury, and very soon becomes something of a financial sector whiz kid. Goes on to be part of some of the largest success stories in the banking industry, banking and financial services. Talk about HDFC, talk about IDFC. Thereafter, becomes a venture capitalist, and for the large part of the last decade, has been involved, has been associated with a large number of ventures in the social entrepreneurship sector, and takes great pleasure in being an educator himself. The person we are talking about is Luis Miranda, and today we are going to learn more about his engrossing journey and hopefully have a glimpse of the secret sauce behind his success. Luis, a very warm welcome to the show.
Thank you, Avik, and I'm glad to be on the show this evening.
Luis, I guess the first question on my mind, right, when I started talking to you and I went through your profile, and I'm sure many of the viewers would be feeling the same, is that when you were starting off, I mean, go all the way back, let's say, to your student days, when you were doing graduation or even high school, did you have a vision that this is what your life and your career would be like? Or did it happen sort of spontaneously, organically?
Sure. I'm glad you asked that question because that's a great place to start. When I look back at whatever I've done in the last so many years, and it looks like I've done different things. Uh, and did I have people have asked me, did you have a plan? Or when I talk to young kids today, did you know what you were going to do? So yes, I did have a plan. I had a plan way back when I was young. The plan was set up by my dad. And he said, you will do your BCom. And I did my BCom. People asked me then, why did you do your CA? Because my dad said to do a CA. Why did he do an MBA? Because my dad said I should do an MBA. And I have no regrets. I think it created a huge opportunity for me to pick up new skills, meet new people, pick up different sort of learnings along the way. And and then I think I did listen to him when I decided to come back to India soon after my MBA. And what happened was this was 1989. A month after I went to school in Chicago, we had the famous Monday crash of October 87. And the economy was in a bad shape, just like it's today. And it was tough getting jobs. I managed to get a summer job with Citibank in New York, working in the chairman's office, which was a great experience. I thought I'd go back there, but at some time I wasn't that keen about it because what I was going to be doing specifically in a full-time role was different. So I was trying to figure out what can I do, and I get this letter from this was 1988. So you didn't get emails, you got letters, and I got this letter basically inviting me to interview with the Asia Pacific group of Citibank, and I wasn't keen on going back to India at that time, but to me it was a free trip to New York, so I went there. I got drunk the previous night with a friend, dropped her off, and then the next morning, the first person I interviewed was somebody from Hong Kong who irritated me. The second person I interviewed was someone from Singapore, and at that time my hangover was kicking in. The third guy I met was this chap from India, and within 5 minutes he talks about marketing foreign exchange products in India. What do you think about it? I had no idea what he was talking about, but he got me so excited about what it was that I decided that this is actually the most interesting offer I have. It paid peanuts. I had the distinction of being the lowest paid guy in my graduating class. But the job was interesting, and that's what I guess the first thing I like to tell people is focus more on the job, what you're going to be doing, as opposed
Mhm.
to the money. And so I came back to India, and then set off a sequence of events, which basically was that every time I had a chance uh, to do to everything I did differently was because someone came to me and said, Lewis, why don't you look at doing this? That's how I moved from Citibank to HSBC. And then in 94, when I was looking at joining an Indian organization because I had enough of being with a multinational, and I was looking at, uh, those days, those who paid a decent, those Indian companies which paid a decent wage were not professional, and those who were professional didn't pay a decent wage. And then suddenly, out of the blue, I get a call saying, we're starting a bank. Are you interested? And it was with some of my former sort of seniors at Citibank.
Mhm.
And I said, sure. I didn't worry about the comp, etc., but it was me just a chance of setting up a bank and being able to prove that we could do something. And that's what we did. And did that for 6 years. Again, I was, been in this for 11 years, and I was looking to do something else. Talked to somebody. I went to meet Mohandas Pai, actually pitched to him for business at Infosys. And he told me, Lewis, you're wasting your time in banking. You should be in the IT sector. And then a series of incidents happened because of that. And I ended up with Chris Capital, which at that time was just a startup venture fund. And uh, and then 2 years later, I decided that that's not what I wanted to do. And I wanted to do something in the development space. So I go to one of my mentors, and Deepak Parekh, and I tell him, Deepak, I want to do something on the development space. I want to work
Mhm.
for until about 4 o'clock in the evening, and I'll be home when the kids come home, and give me some job in low income housing or some project like that. And he said, I don't have a lifestyle like that. Why should you? And then he said, we've got a mandate from the government to set up an infrastructure equity fund. Why don't you set it up and run it? And it sounded interesting because that's something which I wanted to do. But and I said, sure. And that's how I got into infrastructure. I never made an investment in my life. I knew nothing about infrastructure. And then here was I setting up India's largest infrastructure fund. I did that for 8 years. We raised $1.3 billion. And then in 2010, I decided that our kids at that time were 13 and 15. Let me spend some time with them before they go off to college. And looking again at different things, talking to different people, I've ended up now in a basket, a portfolio of things that I'm doing, none of which I knew way back in 2010. So these three
Okay.
buckets of my life, 10 years
Yeah.
in banking,
Mhm.
10 years in private equity, and 10 years in the nonprofit, were purely accidental.
Wow. Okay. Let me take you back to banking and maybe even before that, right? When you were shaping your career and just going from one sort of experience or one adventure, if you will, to the other, who were your influences back in the day? Did you have role models? Did you have people whom you followed? Did you have mentors back in the day? Who were they? And what were they advising you?
Sorry, Avik, you came out a bit unclear, but was your question about who were the role models in my banking
Yes.
career?
Yes.
Okay. I've been fortunate to have worked with some exceedingly brilliant people. I guess in banking, when I was in the dealing room at Citibank, I had this great boss, Rastogi, and a great team over there who helped me in my initial years. Then I had a chance to work for Arvind Sethi at HSBC, again, who I learned a lot from. We had our arguments. We had strong arguments, but I learned a lot from him. And then at HDFC Bank, there was Aditya Puri, and who really was, in my view, someone just totally exceptional. And there was also Deepak Parekh. So between the two of them, you had sort of a grounding, which I thought I was really privileged to be a part of. And that's really what defined what I did and how I got to, I guess, where I was at the bank here. And it also explains why, with someone like Aditya and the team that he had, the bank's been able to grow to where it is today.
Mhm. So tell me this, right? It's one thing to work in Treasury, it's one thing to work in Citibank or HSBC, talking to or working with the top executives, chairman's office, daunting as it is for a man in his, for anybody in his early to mid 20s. But from there, to go into a scenario where you, together with a bunch of other guys who have never set up a bank from scratch, right? To get into really plunge into
Avik,
that
could
kind of
you, Avik,
experience.
Avik, Avik, I can't hear you. Could you repeat yourself?
Okay, sure. So, Louise, what I was saying is it's one thing to work in treasury, to work in the banking sector, right? But quite another to set up a bank from scratch, from absolute zero. And you had no experience of that. You had experience of working in an MNC setup where there were people, there were processes, everything was kind of, if not on autopilot, but there were robust processes and systems in place, both at Citibank and at HSBC, right? From cut to that, and you're creating something right from scratch. What was that experience like?
Okay, Avik, I didn't hear you fully, but I'm going to respond, assuming
Yep,
that I've heard what you've said. So
yep.
I hope I'm replying back to your question. But so you're right. I mean, in a multinational bank, you're working with systems that have been created, built up over time, test, tried, and tested. Here we were a startup bank building up systems from scratch. So the first thing which Aditya did was really build out a team of professionals who knew their subject matter well. So right from the banking operations to the treasury to lending to credit, etc., we really had good people, and I think that's what's important in the bank. And when you're setting up something, make sure you have people with experience who
Hmm.
are focused on being able to do that. So that's the first lesson that I think it's important to do. A lot of the learnings that we had came from our prior background. So I remember when a lot of the people in the team were from Citibank and Bank of America. And Citibank had maybe 5 branches in India. Bank of America had maybe 3 or 4. So they're
Hmm.
used to being in small branch operations. And I came in from HSBC where I saw that we had 30 or 40 branches and the advantage of having a large network. And I would always talk about we need to have more branches, even though I was a treasury guy. And no one in the team really had that experience of being in large number of branches. And we picked that up along the way. We brought in people who had worked in a larger branch networks, etc. And today, HDFC Bank, I can't recognize it at all because it's mainstream. It's got branches all over the place. It's got ATM machines all over the place. So it's grown a lot. And I think part of it was therefore either getting other people on board and also being able to learn along the way and pick up best practices from other people. And I
Hmm.
remember
Hmm.
we were at that time had a partnership with an equity investment from NatWest, and we thought we would learn a lot from them at that stage. But I think a lot of the stuff that we did was really built up on the network and on our learnings ourselves.
Right. So, Louise, hopefully you can hear me now clearly. Can you?
Yeah. Yep.
Okay. Okay, great. So, one of the things which is, of course, paramount, which is fundamental when any organization, regardless of the sector, is scaling up, right? Is how do you keep the values the same? How do you keep the culture the same, right? And having studied in the US, gone to school in the US in Chicago, the Booth School, right? And many of your contemporaries and colleagues would have done the same, educated abroad, worked in an MNC. When you were building up and scaling up HDFC, how did you guys morph the culture of this new organization, which at the end of the day is an Indian firm, it's an Indian bank?
Sure. And that's important. So, for example, I think one of the things we had to give up right at the beginning was all the fancy trappings we had from our foreign bank jobs. No club memberships, no fancy accommodation, no fancy cars, none of that stuff. So that was the first thing, and a lot of people were not happy with it, but that was the way it was. And I think what was also important was we had a CFO at that time, a guy called Vinod Yadamadi, who was not a banker. He didn't come from a banking world. He worked in Burma Shell and a few other manufacturing and other marketing organizations. And he basically drove the control. And Aditya also agreed with him to a large extent. And the
Mhm.
concept of therefore focusing on being a low cost operation was important. I mean, the big thing, remember, that which happened maybe none of us flew business class, none of that stuff. Uh, and uh, and then we had one day Aditya announced that we will not. You have to bring your own coffee mug to the office. And this was bizarre. I mean, like even a small thing like carrying a coffee mug, what the bank was not going to supply to you, you had to bring your own mug, and there was obviously a lot of rumblings about that.
Mm-hmm.
That became part of our culture. That became part of the culture, and not that it saved the bank a lot of money, but it was a message about being careful about spending money. So I think that's what's important. And then it's also, we were a small team, so we'd get together on team. The senior management would get together often. The challenge, though, is maintaining that now. So 25 years later, none of those offsites happen anymore. None of those get-togethers happen like we used to.
Mm-hmm.
Well, maybe it's not needed anymore. But even when we started IDFCP, it was really how do you catch up together? What is also useful at HDFC Bank was every week we'd have a team meeting with Aditya and the senior management, which invariably meant that he'd come and yell at all of us and tell us we're doing or not doing enough of a job. But the fact is that meeting together regularly once a week is what sort of helped the bank a lot in its initial period. And we did the same thing also when I was at IDFC, where we'd meet together as a team and spend and a few hours together talking about deals and stuff that we're learning.
Mm-hmm.
It's a great for the rest of the way for the rest of the team also to learn.
Absolutely. So you talked about moving from banking and within banking, treasury, to a completely different sector, infrastructure, of which you had no experience and knowledge, right? Now, a lot of people, and it's not just working professionals in the corporate sector or in the public sector, but even entrepreneurs, right? Who are starting off and then make some headway, to make some progress in a particular sector, and that becomes like their comfort zone. So they would do more and possibly more innovative things, more of the same and innovative things, but mainly in around the same or allied sectors, right? So tell us your experience about this movement to a completely different sector, and what would be your advice, right? How would you develop that sense of confidence saying, okay, I don't know infrastructure, but hey, what the heck? I'm going to go in, I'm going to learn, and I'm going to succeed.
Sure. So let's look at. I mean, my journey from HDFC Bank to IDFC Private Equity.
Mm-hmm.
I paused for 2 years at a small venture fund at that time called Chrysalis Capital, and I got there because they were expanding the team and they wanted someone to look after the operations part of it, finance, and and HR and the other parts of the non-investing part. And they met up with Mohandas Pai, who I told you I'd met up with earlier, and and they were looking to expand the team. They reached out to him, and he said, "Why don't you talk to Lewis?" And that's how I came on board. And and to me, it was just that at that time I was intrigued by the internet and wanted to know what it was all about. And Chris Capital at that time was investing in these young internet companies, and I was like literally I was the old man on the team, and I was handling and from being 11 years on a front sort of customer facing dealing room role, here was I at the back end. But Ashish pulled me in to sort of help him with the fundraising, and that gave me a chance to pick up a new set of skills, which was about earlier I would sell foreign exchange products, and now I was selling a
Mm-hmm.
fund to potential investors. At the same time, also understanding the back end part of the business. So that 2 year window helped me pick up a new skills and also gave me a different profile from being just a treasury sales guy to sort of being a more broad based in a person. And so
Mm-hmm.
when
Mm-hmm.
Deepak asked me to set up this fund, it was more based on my experience of my capability of getting things done and being in I would say vague or incomplete environments in business situations. So and I think that was required to start up IDFC Private Equity because it was a
Mm-hmm.
new business line for IDFC, which was a traditional infrastructure lender. And when I came in also, I looked at what they had planned and I said, this doesn't make sense from IDFC's perspective, nor from the investor's perspective. And I changed a lot of the plans which the team had originally worked on because I thought it just didn't make sense. And I remember the biggest opposition I had to the new plan for the new fund was internally from at IDFC themselves. And they said, "Oh, how can you charge so much? How can you do this? How can you do that?" And I finally
Mm-hmm.
managed to convince the people at IDFC. Then I had to go convince the people in the government because the Ministry of Finance said this doesn't make sense, and then I had to convince them. Then I had to convince the investors. And along the way, I also realized that I have no investing experience. I have no infrastructure experience. So I need to get that quickly onto the team. So I brought in people from where I have infrastructure experience and investing experience. And then so we had the team in place. We had the broad strategy in place. And and then we sort of had to look and say that at that time, and this was 2002, no one believed you could make money investing in infrastructure. Even at IDFC, they didn't believe you could. And all I knew was this sort of macro thesis that infrastructure was bad. Everyone's
Mhm.
investing in India, expecting India to do well. If the infrastructure doesn't improve, those people aren't going to make the returns. So somehow along the way, we're going to be able to improve the infrastructure in the country. And so we said what's also lacking is the fact that till then, infrastructure equity investing meant looking at investing in certain projects. And that wearing my hat that I learned at Chris Capital didn't make sense to me because you invest in a particular project, if the project gets delayed, you lost your money. So we instead said, why can we create a private equity approach to infrastructure? And that was, I think, unique in the world. People had, earlier across the world had looked at infrastructure as a project investment. We said, let's create a capital market story in the infrastructure space. We actually
Mhm.
didn't realize the importance of what we were doing, but we really created a growth story in infrastructure in India. And that sort of helped us. Our first fund did brilliantly well. Our second fund, we just walked straight into the financial crisis, so we got killed in that one. And the third fund's doing okay. But the important point from all of this was that we created the growth story of infrastructure in the sector, and that helped us, create the opportunities we had. And why did we do that? It's because of all the skill sets we bought before. If we, as you said, if we looked at it, if we talked to any infrastructure person at the time, they would have done it the traditional way.
Mhm. Mhm. But in a way, because you were coming from outside the sector, right?
Yes.
And with a different set of skill sets and different experiences, you could experiment and you could sort of innovate and do things in a fresh, new perspective, right? One of the other things, right? If I look at the skill sets, there is a deeper behavioral skill set at play, Louise. Don't know if you'll agree with me. And that is not just being comfortable in uncertainty, in a paradigm of ambiguity, but actually taking to it like a fish to water. Because in all that you said over the last 5, 7 minutes, right, if you did not love the prospect of creating something out of nothing in an ambiguous circumstance, none of this would have transpired. So talk to us about that.
Sure. Honestly, when today it looks great. People talk about entrepreneurship as a great business, a great place to be in,
Mhm.
startups, etc. These are the buzzwords today.
Yeah, these are very
Way
cool
back
today.
in '89, when I was in business school, we weren't taught entrepreneurship. We weren't taught private equity. We weren't taught infrastructure. None of the things that or even not even taught foreign exchange at that time. So none of the things that I did after business school were things that I learned over there. But there are other things that I learned at business school which were very important. And one was challenge everything, which helps you therefore deal with that ambiguity and that uncertainty. Just
Mhm.
because someone said this is how infrastructure investing should be doesn't mean that that's the right way to do it. Can we do it some
Mhm.
other way? That's the first skill that I learned at Chicago, which was challenge everything. And the second was if something's broken, don't whine about it, fix it. So we looked at infrastructure, for example, people said, you can't do anything about it. No, you can do something about it. And I remember our first investment, when you come back to this whole thing of ambiguity and experience, etc. Our first
Mhm.
investment was with the GMR group. And we were investing in a power business, and they were looking to aggregate. And we told them, listen, why don't you set up a holding company and we'll aggregate that and we can take this company public. That was the investment thesis at that time. And then a few years later, one of my professors at Chicago Booth wrote a case study on us. And I was in the classroom when he discussed it with the team with this class for the first time. And then the students over there said the biggest risk on the deal was that the team did not have any power experience in that
Mhm. Mhm.
sector. And I said that's exactly why we did the deal, because if we had experience in the power sector, we would never have done that deal. But we instead looked at it as a private equity story. We looked at it as an opportunity to build out a markets, a large portfolio in this, and we ended up making 7 times our money on that deal. Not because we continued as a power business, but we then bid for the Delhi airport. We merged all the companies together. We went public, and we created an airport story. So what was originally a power story ended up being
Mm-hmm.
an airport story by the time we exited. And that's wearing that hat of looking at things and dealing with that ambiguity and uncertainty, and being able to pivot soon from our initial thesis to something else. And that's what's important, I think. Today, when people, you look, for example, even at HDFC Bank, from what we thought we would do in the beginning and where we are today, no one on that team really expected that. But it came along gradually, step by step, building it out and focusing on just building up value. I think the problem today is also when people look at, what is my share price? How am I going to do
Mm-hmm.
well in that? We never had those discussions really. It was all about how can we build a business, a platform that we can leverage off later on. When we started IDFCP, we never talked about, we're going to have this huge return. We said instead, let's be able to deliver a decent return to our investors so that we can say we can prove that you can make money investing in infrastructure.
Wow. Okay, great. And in terms of your work at Chrysalis Capital, you said back in the day it was a very small fund, right? But talk to us about how this fund became much bigger and the growth story of that and your role and involvement at Chrysalis.
Look, at Chrysalis, I was it was there for 2 years, so I can't claim to have much of a role over there. I mean, Ashish Dhawan is one of the smartest guys I've ever met, and he, has been able to transform that what was initially a young fund set up with a classmate of his, Raj Kundur, uh, with an initial fund of $65 million, which within a year was going to implode because of the dot-com crisis.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm,
And I traveled with him a lot. We didn't have much money those days. We were fundraising for our second fund, and we'd fly on cheap flights. We'd share hotel rooms, and we really, I saw him at close quarters working, and I saw the passion and the drive that he had. Uh, we raised our second fund in an extremely tight environment, and then morphed from being an early stage venture fund to being an investor in listed companies. And then today, Chris Capital, as it's now called, is a very different animal. It's doesn't it's sort of morphed into a very respectable non minority stake investor, and Kunal, who's running it, is also doing a fabulous job. But again, it's that ability to say, okay, this is what we started out with, that doesn't work, let's
mm-hmm,
move around to something else, but at the
mm-hmm.
same time not sort of go do something which we're totally unfamiliar with, and stick to that. So I was there for 2 years, and I left in 2002, and in the last 18 years it's been a different journey. They've really done brilliantly well in that period.
Right. So before we move on, one last question at this point around banking and financial services and also equity and private funds. What's your prognosis? I mean, given everything that's happening around us at the moment, right, as a fallout, a continuing fallout of the COVID-19 pandemic, right? What's your prognosis? What's your projection? What's your vision for the sector as a whole? How do you think that's going to play out?
I think we got to have patience. I think today one of the big lessons people need to have is have patience, because all of this will pass in one time. But when that time will come, will it be 3 months, 6 months, 2 years? I don't know. Will it be 5 years? I don't think it's going to take that long.
Mm-hmm,
But we're going to go through a lot of pain in the short term, and people need to have patience. So it's like, when I'm talking to the students at ISPP, my view is make sure you get a job which you will learn. Don't worry too much about the compensation, just like I didn't worry way back in '89. Just focus on building up your skill sets, meeting up with people, so that when you are ready to, when the market opens up, people come to you. Every opportunity that I've done in my life, be it move from Citibank to HSBC, to HDFC Bank, to Chris Capital, to IDFCP was because someone suggested it to me. Someone said, Lewis, why don't you do that? So it's very
Hmm.
important. One of the skill sets is to get people to know you. Be out over there, meet people, be confident, don't oversell, and build up a reputation of getting things done. In fact, Jeff Bezos, when he was interviewed a few years ago on how do they promote people in his company, it was nothing about how good they are dealing with people, are they team play, and other stuff. Basically, he said, "I promote people who get things right." So it's really about getting things done
Hmm. Hmm.
is important. So come back to your question: what's the future going to be like? I think the future is going to be tough in the short term, but I think in the in sort of in the medium term, it's going to be a very different world with a lot of new opportunities and a lot of new things are going to happen. So, for example, are people going to travel as much as they did in the past? Maybe not, but people tend to have a short memory. So, so once things get normalized, once a vaccine is found, once there's herd
Hmm.
immunity,
Hmm.
once people get comfortable, will they be jumping on planes like they did before? Maybe, but maybe not. Will people be going to restaurants the way they did? Will they be going to hanging out together in closed environments as much as they did? I don't know. It's very possible that people have short-term memories and are bored and
Hmm.
finally realizing that the risk of doing something like this is low.
They will go
Uh,
back to that.
we go back to that. All I know is that you should. I mean, the skill to pick up is really the ability to pivot. If you are today, I just yesterday I was talking to this young lady who we're trying to recruit her for somewhere else, and she realized through the conversation that she is not able to pivot that well as well the way we would expect her to, and to to be agile. She's more used to thinking about something in a long-term scenario, and I think
Hmm.
people like them, if in a normal world, will do brilliantly well because they build things that scale. But in an
Yep.
uncertain place like this today, it's not the right strategy to follow. So be nimble, be ready to pivot, talk to a lot of people, uh, pick up skills, and build up a track record of executing well. I think that's what's important in today's world.
Hmm. And what brought on your decision, having done and achieved all of these, to quit all of that and not take up one particular project full time, but to immerse yourself into a number of different ventures? Was
So
that planned as well, or did that happen like very spontaneously, naturally?
now, so when I quit in 2010, I had no idea what I would do. All I knew was what I would not do, which was at that stage in 2010, I wouldn't start something on my own and then I wouldn't do anything full time. But beyond that, I had no idea. Our kids at that time were 13 and 15. In fact, so the day after after my last day at work, my son and I went to Africa and we climbed Kilimanjaro. So there was no contact with the outside world. And I literally in the first year and a half, 2 years, to me the most precious commodity was time, to spend time with the kids. So that was so I deliberately kept myself on a low key. And it all goes back actually to a conversation I had way back in 2002 with one of my mentors, a guy called Shekhar in Bangalore. I was in his car, and and I was upset about something happening at work, and he takes out a picture of Ganesh, small frame like this, and he says, Lewis, I know you're not Hindu, but keep it on your desk. And whenever you're frustrated, look at it and remember what I'm telling you. And what he told me was, focus on the important things in life. And that to me has been the best advice I've been given. It's always sort of helped me because today there are so many pulls and pressures you have. Some things aren't working well. There's COVID. I got to do a Zoom call. The business is not doing well. There's someone screaming at home. My kid's not well. If you just focus on what's important for you, all the other stuff becomes noise. So therefore, I'd suggest that the first thing to do, of course, is figure out what's the important thing for you in your life.
Hmm.
I was
Hmm.
very clear when I was given this advice in 2002. It was my two kids and my wife that were important. Everything else was irrelevant. So when I quit in 2010, what was important was that I spent time with the kids. And so when you put that lens on, I had enough money in the bank. I don't have a lot of money, but I have enough to be comfortable with. And my wife and I were anyway clear that any money we make, we're going to give it away. So I remember talking to the dean at Chicago Booth in 2010. He said, Lewis, why did you quit? And I said, because I woke up one day realizing that I'm going to be working for you. And he said, what do you mean? I said, Fiona and I decided that whatever we make, we're going to give away. So why was I working hard if I'm going to make the money and give it away? So I might as well spend time with my kids instead. So suddenly when you when you focus on that filter
Hmm.
or focus on the important things in life, everything becomes easy. Decisions become so much easier when you use that filter. So it wasn't a tough decision for me in 2010 when I was 48 to chuck it all up.
Um, you mentioned the ISPP, right? So, for the
Yeah.
viewers, that's the Indian School of Public Policy that Louis, together with his co founder, has set up, and which is a very niche institute. So, students come in and then pass out, and they get into think tanks, and they get into jobs at typically the ministry level, and so forth. Um, tell us tell us the rationale, the motivation for starting something like this, because it's one thing to have a Chicago boot school like environment, right, to create a management school here which is along the lines of the boot school, or to have like a franchisee open up here, etc., etc. But instead you went on to do something very different at ISPP. What was the motivation behind that? What was the inspiration behind that?
Well, it actually goes back to again another conversation I had over lunch, maybe around 2011 or 12 with a guy called Ajay Shah, and he told me, Louis, he was talking, we were just catching up. He said, "What are your plans? What are you thinking about doing?" And I told him, this is what I'm looking. He said, "You should talk to a guy called Parth Shah."
Mhm.
He set up a think tank called the Center for Civil Society, and I said, "Sure." So I reached out to Parth, and we got talking and I liked what he was doing, and he set this up. Today actually is our 23rd anniversary. We
Oh,
just celebrated earlier this
congratulations.
afternoon. Thank you, Founders Day. And at the Center for Civil Society, we were working on how do we get young adults and people to focus more on public policy and promote the ideas of free markets, individual choice, institutional accountability, etc. So initially, I came on the board of advisors. I now chair it. And one of the things that we've been doing over the years is running something which we call the CCS Academy, where we run 4-day policies on called iPolicy to teach what public policy is to young adults. And we said, can we do something? And when we, for our 20th anniversary, we were talking to our alumni and as to what are the various things that you learned or important from our history. And they said, what they learned at iPolicy was important. And Parth and I were talking about, is it time for us? Other people have set up public policy programs. And initially, we were concerned that there were no jobs available where would they work, so that we didn't do it earlier. And we
Mhm.
felt about 3 years, 2.5 years ago, that the time is right for us to start something. So in 2000 and we're on 20, so 2018, we decided let's launch it in a year's time, and in 2019 we launched it. And the aim was really to set up a unique product in India to teach public policy. And a lot of people in business ask me, what is public policy? And public policy is really how is making sure that whatever we do, with the government does or we do in terms of any of the rules and regulations, they're framed properly to avoid unintended consequences. And we've got Subhashish Gangopadhyay as our first dean, and he's doing a fabulous job. Our first batch has graduated. Unfortunately, it's the worst time to be graduating, so there've been
Mhm.
some struggles. So some of our students have landed up very well. Some are still sort of looking out for opportunities. But what we're trying to do is try to create a platform within a year of transitioning from this vacuum that's there in the country, where there's no real link between the theory and the
Sort of formal
practice.
academia and the actual
Yes,
work, the
absolutely.
actual world of
Yeah,
public policy, public finance, and
absolutely.
decision making, right?
So that's what we're trying to sort of build out over there and teach
And
policy
bridge it.
design and management. And again,
Mhm.
to me, it's been fascinating the last 1 year because I've met so many interesting people in the space, including you, and and just seeing how you've been able to stitch something together. It's still work in progress, but we
Mhm.
hope to get there eventually.
So, talking about ISPP, we were talking the other day, right? And you mentioned to me that you have your own framework, your own model, which sounds like force, but it's spelled in a different way, right? So, explain that to the viewers, enumerate that for us. And why do you think
Okay.
that's important?
Sure, so it actually boils down to figuring out what is your core strength. And years back, I was taking part in a 55-kilometer beach walk in Goa. So we were doing one of our practice walks with this organization called Umid in Mumbai. And the husband of the founder was walking with me, and he used to run a consulting firm in India. He said, Lewis, can you come and talk to my team about how you stay in touch with people over the years? And just about how you maintain those relationships. And I said, sure, no problem, because I always say, sure, no problem. And then I suddenly realized, what am I going to talk to a bunch of consultants about how I stay in touch with people? Because, as you know, Avik, yourself, you do this thing naturally. So I went to my wife and I said, listen, I need help with this. So why don't you tell me, what is it that I do? You observe what I do. So I remember we were driving to the airport. I had a flight to catch or something. So she was driving and I was taking notes as she was talking about, you do this, I see you doing this, I see you doing this. And through that conversation, by the time we reached the airport, I realized that I had enough data to figure out to talk to a bunch of consultants. Now, the thing again, you've been a consultant yourself, so you know that if a consultant doesn't see something in a framework, they don't understand it. So I had to create a framework for these consultants to understand. So I started figuring out acronyms and using words of the various points that I did. And so I came up with this sort of model called FORCE, which is spelled PHORCE, where P stands for positivity. So I think the first thing you need to do, okay, so let me backtrack a bit again. So along the way, while I was working on this thing, I realized actually that my core strength, my core skill is actually networking. I'm not really the smartest guy in the room, but I sure can connect with people, and therefore through that connection, then helping them connect, being able to do stuff. So P stands for positivity. You got to be positive in whatever you're trying to do, and even with connecting with people. Otherwise, if you go with a negative attitude, you're not going to be able to succeed. H stands for hard work. A lot of work is required in maintaining relationships and staying in touch with people. O stands for open-mindedness, and being open to the fact that you're not always right, or that there can be another point of view. Today, one of the challenges we have in the world is that everybody believes that their point of view is the right one. You're either black or you're white. There's no shade of gray in today's world. You're either with us or against us. So that's a huge problem we have today, because people are not open-minded. They're not willing to look at the fact that there could be someone with a different point of view, and maybe both points of view are correct in a way, or both incorrect in a way. So that's also important in building up relationships. R stands for just the whole process of building up relationships, staying in touch with people, reaching out to them, preparing for a meeting, etc. C stands for confidence, trust in people. Because if you don't trust people, if you're always suspicious of them, you'll never build up a large network of relationships. And E stands for empathy. And I know you've written a book on empathy, and by the way, I've just ordered it because I need to prep for my session by reading about your book. But that's really the force model.
Okay, so would you say that over and above open-mindedness, when you're talking about empathy, just emotional connect, just the ability to be able to place myself in the other person's shoes, and we see instances of this all the time in the workplace and even beyond in the personal life, do you think that we, in general, have an empathy deficit at the moment? For whatever reason.
It's contextual. There are some people who don't have it. There's some people who have too much of it. And the question is always having that right balance. If you're always going to think about the other person and feel too sorry, you're not tough enough at times. And sometimes if you're too brutal, you're not going to have people to work with. So it's, so I remember a conversation I had with you as, what is the skill sets, the definition of someone, what's the skill that's required for someone in public policy? And I was asked this question, and I came to you, Avik, I need help in answering this question. And we, I guess, realized that there is nothing like a template of what's required to be done. Because there's some people who are extremely tough, but they're extremely knowledgeable, and therefore they can deliver. There are other people who are very good managers and can bring out the best in the people. So, so there are different things. But I think one of the skill sets that you talked about was resilience, and the ability to sort of keep on plodding even though you have setbacks. And that's a skill set which is, I think, extremely important for people. And yep.
And that's actually embedded in your curriculum, right? Which I later found out as soon
Yeah,
as I talked about it, right?
that's yeah.
So, so, so people will often ask, right, if there's something on a behavioral aspect. I mean, if I take a step back, right? If I'm talking about public policy and part of that has to do with law and legislative processes, part of that may have to do with public finance or economics, right? Now, these are things where you have things which are very tangible, right? And you have frameworks and you have models and you have case studies, and one can learn and assimilate and process and sort of internalize that. But when you're talking about something which is more intangible, like resilience, like perseverance, how do you help your students achieve that? Because after all, you're taking them through this journey for what, just about a year or so, right? How do you help them to move the needle and help them acquire these skills?
Actually, for that's it's a great question, Avik. And then, like, we've started something at the Indian School of Public Policy called the Antarang Leadership Lab, and you kicked off the first session over there, and it's really using those workshops. We do all this through workshops, teaching these young adults, scholars we have, some of the leadership skills that they will require when they go out, be it networking, working in groups, dealing in cross-cultural situations, making a presentation, building resilience,
Mm-hmm.
uh, figuring out in your own mind what is success, uh, creating first impressions, handling feedback, giving feedback. These are some of the challenges which we're working with. And the idea for this actually came from something that I was involved with 31 years ago at Chicago booth, actually 32. In 1988, we got slammed in in the first ranking of business schools, and I went to the deputy dean, a guy called Harry Davis, and I told him, Harry, how can I help? And he said, Lewis, why don't you get a bunch of students together and suggest to the faculty what we should do? So we actually did a brainstorming about what are the things that were good, what are the things that were bad at the school, and therefore, and retain what we were good at and fix for some of the things that we needed to do. And out of that thing came this course called LEAD, which in 1989 was offered to the students for the first time as a compulsory course, the only compulsory course at Chicago booth way back in 89. And that sort of course revolutionized the school, because the next time Business Week did its rankings,
Mm-hmm.
Chicago was ranked by the students number one from number 20 the 2 years ago. So a huge jump. And that's been the only compulsory course at Booth for the last 31 years. So we've tried to duplicate that at ISPP with the Antarang Leadership Lab.
So one of the questions, because we're getting towards the last 15 minutes of our show, so one of the questions, which is quite pertinent, is what kind of career opportunities or paths can a young adult or a student pursue? So let's say graduating from ISPP, right? What could be some of the career options one could think of? Maybe not immediately, but in a
Sure.
post-COVID kind of a scenario.
So there are various things you can do in public policy. One is work in the government. Secondly, work with the corporate world. Or third, work in the non-profit world. Samaj, Sarkar, Bazaar. I mean, it's simple. So if you're working with the government, you could either work in a direct government CI or Niti Aayog or Invest India, where they take on people on 3-year contracts. You could always also go in through the UPSC line and join the civil service.
Mm-hmm.
Or you could, like one of our young graduates has gone and joined the Ministry of Health Department as a consultant on behalf of a multilateral agency, working very closely with the Joint Secretary in that department because he asked for him. So that's one opportunity you can do with the government. There are also the state governments, and some of us are working as fellows. We've set up some fellowships where, for example, in Andhra Pradesh, we're working with the state government over there. We're working with the central government on smart cities, etc. So that's an opportunity to work with the government. The second set is to work with the consulting firms, because they do work on behalf, working with state governments and central governments. So this year, unfortunately, has been a bad year for them because of COVID, etc. But that will bounce back. So you're working with these consulting firms who are doing projects either funded by multilaterals or funded by the government, working on specific areas with state governments of the center. Then you have the corporate world. You have teams who are working on public policy. See, so far in the past, lobbying was within the corporate world was really meeting, figuring out who are the key people and giving and gifting them stuff. and trying to get them to change policy. Now is something which is a lot more systematic, a lot more
So
procedural.
methodological
Absolutely.
possibly. Mhm.
Absolutely. So that's the opportunity you have over there in the corporate world, and some of our scholars are joining those places. Then there could be new businesses like e-commerce, fintech, etc. Huge opportunities, which are, and the policy is challenges in those sectors are just huge. And the third area is the nonprofit world. So you could be working with a nonprofit like an NGO. You could be working with a think tank like the Center for Civil Society, like even like Educate Girls, where I'm on the board of. We've got a young guy from the Kennedy School, and his work is really working, helping build up the bridges we have with our relationships with the various state governments that we work with. So these are
Mhm.
some of the opportunities you have as a graduate in public policy, which didn't really exist in the past, and now are coming up. So even with the consulting firms, a lot of the work they did, they employed MBAs who were great in doing a modeling, doing a spreadsheet stuff, but they had no
Right.
understanding of how to draft a public policy which would make
Mhm.
sense, and that's where our scholars come in.
Great. Stepping back again from public policy to your personal ethos, one thing that I sense, if I look at Indian School of Public Policy, I look at Educate Girls, which you just mentioned, I look at Take Charge, which is again about mentorship. Somewhere I sense that you yourself, at sort of definitive periods of time or points in your career, have benefited from the advice of mentors, and you've mentioned a lot of them. And perhaps one of the reasons, because when you're talking about social entrepreneurship sector, you can talk about so many different things. But if I look at the portfolio of the ventures that you are closely working on today, a large number of them have to do with mentorship, where you're actually spending time talking to people, talking to youngsters, and giving things back to them. Has this been something that's been like a part of your life, fundamentally, philosophically?
Sure, absolutely right. So, and I've benefited from the fact that I've been mentored by various people. So, be it my dad and mom when I was younger, then to professors at college, and then with seniors at work and other well-wishers of me. So I've had the benefit of being advised by them, and I've had a multiple bunch of them, and even my wife. A lot of the times, decisions being taken were conversations I had with her, and she's not
Hmm.
a business person. She's done her PhD in microbiology, but she brings in a different perspective to the point being discussed. So I think it's very important to have people you can go to. And I remember I was with one of my mentors actually in a classroom in Chicago about 20 years ago, and we were talking at a class on leadership, and Jerry talked about how it's so lonely at the top, and I was speaking after him, and I said, I don't feel lonely because I've surrounded myself with people I can go to for help. One of them being you, and the other one was actually the professor in whose class we were at. And I said, the fact that I've got people around is so
Hmm.
important. So when actually again setting up Take Charge, the mentoring program wasn't my idea. It was somebody else's idea, and I just grabbed onto it because I felt it was so important. And we now built up this program to sort of mentor Catholic youth in Mumbai, and we just launched our fourth cohort with 150 kids. And it's really about how can you sort of you know, help the next generation of people, and in a way repay the benefits that I got when I was their age, being mentored by other people, and
Hmm.
pass that on to us. So I think it's
Yep.
extremely important for people to be able. And actually, I think we sometimes when we mentors get together, we actually feel that we're actually learning a lot more than the kids we mentor,
Hmm.
because there's so much of when you're talking to someone of a different generation, you frankly have no need to be connected with. It's really an interesting exercise to figure out how you build up that relationship of trust.
Yep. There are a lot of people in the corporate sector today, some based on expediency, some based on circumstances in what we are undergoing as a result of the ongoing pandemic. But again, maybe an increasing number of corporate professionals having reached a particular management level now want to cross over and now want to do something new, fresh, meaningful. And we see a large number of them. And possibly the pandemic has actually hastened and sort of accelerated this process across a large number of people. And many of them, so they've worked for 20, 25 years, have that money basic saved, right? They have ideas, they bring quite a bit of experience to the table, but they would be necessarily a little ambivalent, if not confused, about what exactly should I be doing, right? And there is an increasing number of such individuals. What would be your advice to them, having crossed over so many times successfully?
So I'm going to reply back with two stories and then come back to it. So two quick stories. One goes back to 1989. I was having dinner at one of my classmates' house. His father was dean of philosophy at the American Catholic University. And I remember that dinner for two reasons. One, I dropped my glass of red wine on their tablecloth, not once, twice. It was embarrassing. And the second was the conversation I had with his dad. His dad said, "Louis, what are you doing? What are your plans?" I said, "I'm going back to India. I'm going to work for Citibank." And he said, "Then what?" And I said, "Eventually I want to get into politics." And so he looks at me and says, "Why?" I was 27 years old at that time, and all of us at 27 want to change the world, etc., etc. And I gave him all the usual story. I want to change the world, have an impact, etc. He looked at me and said, "You don't need to be a politician to have an impact in this world. The world needs good bankers. If you're a good banker, you've had an impact. So, for example, you're a good consultant, you're having an impact. You're a good teacher, you're having an impact. You're a good gardener, you're having an impact. Whatever you do, as long as you do it well and honestly, you're having an impact." And that stuck with me. So while I was in my banking career, and I've still not got into politics, and I don't think I will, but whatever I've looked at, I've tried to look and see, am I creating an impact other than just making money for myself or for the investors?
Mm-hmm.
And that's what's driven me. And the moment I realized that the only reason for me to stay on in a particular place is for the money, that's when I quit, because it's got to have a purpose. So that's important for me. So so today I see a lot of people wanting to feel, because today a lot of people make you feel guilty if you're in the corporate world. And the fact is that you need the corporate world. You need those people to create jobs. And the best way to reduce poverty is through economic development. I mean, all the stuff that we do in the nonprofit sector is very important. But if people just focused on growing the economy, we'll have less poverty in the world today. You see that happen in China, which is the most brilliant example. From 78% people in absolute poverty to 8% in 30 years is fabulous, never seen before. So anyway, so the advice to people looking to crossover is, one, figure out, do you really need to do so? If you really want to create impact, you could actually create impact also in the corporate world. You don't need to cross over. And this is an example I had with someone else whose husband came to me and said, "Listen, I'm looking at moving out." He was in an FMCG company, and I actually told him about the same Professor Dougherty story. And he decided to stay on. And now he's working on a project to reduce the plastic usage in that company, which is more impactful than anything you do in a non-profit place here. So that's one thing. Secondly, is drink a lot of coffee, meet a lot of people, volunteer and I'm saying drink a lot of coffee because you don't get, if you're in the corporate world, you drink a lot of whiskey, etc. No, you just drink a lot of coffee, and meet up with people, understand what they're doing, volunteer with somebody, figure out whether the ethos is right, whether you like to work with these people, and then cross over there. And there have been some very interesting programs like the ILSS, the Indian in Leadership and Social Sector, run out of Delhi, which does a fabulous training session for someone who's interested in figuring out what the other side is like. And I've seen so many people be happy moving over, and I've seen some people who had to go back also. So there's nothing like the right answer for that. Or I've seen some people who keep moving between the two. Sometimes you want to have a purpose, so you move to the nonprofit space. Then you suddenly realize, I have bills to pay. You move back to the corporate world, and that's perfectly fine. But
Yeah.
I think one advice I have is, don't come in believing that because you're from the corporate world and you've done this great job at this multinational, or you built up this great bank, that you can teach these people in the NGO to how to do better. No, that's the worst thing. People, they hate it when you come and tell them that you know how to do things. You got to learn from them. I've learned so much actually in the last 10 years.
So it's again basically the mindset. So either at an individual level or at an institutional level, and there was Anitesh's question just now, we can have it back on screen. At an individual level, what you're saying is one needs to have open-mindedness, one needs to have positivity, one needs to have empathy, one needs to have resilience. And possibly when you roll that up to an organizational level as well, right? I mean, we have the CSR mandates, which is mandated by law, that X percentage of my operating profit in the last 3 years, not X number of years, has to go in for CSR. But is that just something which is a checkbox activity, or is that something that the stakeholders in the corporate are really invested in, right, from the depths of their heart? I think that mindset makes all the difference, right?
So yeah, true. So the question is, at the moment, I think a lot of people, for them, is tick the box. I've got to do it. I do tick the box and get it done. But over time, as people realize this is important, I'm spending 2% of my profits on something. I might as well do it properly because it makes business sense to do so. So over time, it's going to become a highly more focused and tuned, and not just tick the box. Uh, you know, so I think that it's a question of how does a habit over time become something which actually reach the purpose it's supposed to.
Hmm.
And it's a great question, Anitesh.
And
And today also a lot of people, corporates are going to be more socially attuned, not necessarily because they want to all become non-profits or wear khadi, etc., but because it makes good business sense. Milton Friedman got criticized a lot for saying that the purpose of business is to make money, and I think he's right. The purpose of a business is to make money, but what people fail to talk about is the rest of what he said. The purpose of business is to make money, as long as it is within the rules of the law or whatever, and it's done fairly in proper competition. So that part is forgotten about. So if you, for example, if the rules of the law says that you need to sort of be a conscious citizen, that the businesses have to follow that law also, and then make money subject to that framework.
mhm, yep. And finally, this was a question that I think Ishani asked earlier in the program. A number of people today live with the perpetual sort of worry, anxiety that they're not going to be able to keep their jobs, and an increasing number actually have or are in the process of losing their jobs, right? In this ongoing setup. And many of them would have absolutely no clue of what right hit them, right? They would have gone through their education and had great aspirations and great hopes, and then X number of years down the line the unthinkable has happened, right? Now, as someone who has traversed many different situations, right, and has played a number of roles, what would you say in terms of advising them if they are in this situation, and tens of thousands of people more are in that situation today in India and a much larger section abroad? What would be your advice to them?
I think the first thing is to realize that this today's world of lifetime employment is doesn't exist, because your company may actually have a shorter life than you. So that's sort of something you got to take off the charts. So focus on building up your own CV. To me, I've always said your CV, your biodata is really your biggest asset. So one is to make sure that you have a track record of doing things, and the second is making sure people know about you. As I said, everything that I've done is because someone's come and told me, Lewis, why don't you try this? So it's important
Mhm,
that people you meet get to sort of know about you and know that you can deliver stuff. Because when things go bad, you should be able to jump ship or change careers like I've done. I've done different things. I started off as an accountant, then became a treasury sales guy, then I became treasurer, then I got into became a CFO in a venture fund, then started investing in infrastructure. And today I also chair a health insurance company. So the ability to try, to move across different aspects is really the ability of figuring out what is your core strength. In my case, it was about networking, it's about building organizations, dealing with uncertainty, etc. And not necessarily for the technical skills that you bring to the table. You need those technical
mhm,
skills in your first year or second year as an analyst, as an associate. After that, it's really how your ability to manage teams and build people. So, so don't worry too much about moving to a different sector. Don't worry too much about. I mean, you got to worry if you get laid off, etc. But the fact is that in this environment, it's going to be tough. But a year later, hopefully, things will be very different. So the question is really, how do you stay afloat in this period? So
mhm,
one you is really cut down on your unnecessary expenditure, conserve capital, and this is both for the company as well as for individuals, and make sure that you stay afloat, and don't be afraid to try new things. The world's going to be so different. The jobs we had in the past are going to be sort of redundant, some of them, and they're going to be new opportunities in new sectors.
So,
Be willing to pivot.
yeah, and we're going to make this the last question because we've gone over time. But this is a very interesting one. You talked about spending time, right, on building your own story, your own brand, your own CV. What are the maybe the top things that you look at in a CV? So let's say you're taking somebody on for CCS, or you're taking somebody on for Take Charge, or any of the other ventures where you're on the board. What are the things that you would look for typically?
Okay, what I look
What
for,
would
not
excite
necessarily
you?
what the organization may look forward to, but I
Sure.
look for people who are interesting people. And there used to be the old joke: is this someone you want to spend 3 hours stuck in an airport with? That's one. Secondly, does the person have a track record of getting things done? And
Hmm.
three is, is that person positive? That to me is how I look at things. If you'd ask me this, you give three top of the mind thing. This is what I
Hmm.
would look at: the ability to get things done, willing to be stuck with that person, and the person having a positive attitude. And positive attitude is so important because today most people are. I mean, a lot of the people like I won't say most, but a lot of people like are so negative. It's terrible being with them because you come back feeling drained after that.
Hmm.
Whereas people are positive, even in the stock market, I see some people, and it's nothing to do with having money. Some of the people who are most positive are the ones who don't have money, but they're so excited about the fact that they've seen their own lives change in this period. And we got to realize the fact that we may tend to look back and say, we live in this terrible world, but actually, the world is so much better than what it was 30 years ago. And today it looks, everyone's focusing on the recency impact of COVID. But when you look at a lot of things, this COVID's a huge roadblock, but things will be very different 5 years later. And I think that's something which is people need to keep in mind. The world is actually getting to be a much better place, despite all the negativity around.
Wonderful. And on that very, very promising, encouraging note, Louise, we've gone over time. We would draw this particular conversation to a close. It's been absolutely fascinating talking to you. And of course, I have the privilege of talking to you ever so often. But for the viewers, this has been really good. And I hope you've had your questions answered and have had certain key takeaways from this conversation. We'll be back again with another session, another episode of Candid Talk next week. Till then, stay safe, God bless, and thank you. Good
Avik,
night.
thank you for this opportunity.
Bye bye.